Welcome to Your Anxiety Toolkit. I'm your host, Kimberley Quinlan. This podcast is fueled by three main goals. The first goal is to provide you with some extra tools to help you manage your anxiety. Second goal, to inspire you. Anxiety doesn't get to decide how you live your life. And number three, and I leave the best for last, is to provide you with one big, fat virtual hug. Because experiencing anxiety ain't easy. If that sounds good to you, let's go. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had an amazing week. I am very excited to introduce to you this week's interview guest. Her name is Lynn Lyons, and she is an author. She's been an author to many amazing books, and she's written a new book called The Anxiety Audit: 7 Sneaky Ways Anxiety Takes Hold and How to Escape Them. And today I have her on the podcast, and we are going to go through each and every one of those 7 sneaky ways and talk about how you can master your own anxiety. Now, some of the skills she's talked about, we have talked about here on the podcast quite a bit, but I always think it's so fun to have someone explain it in their particular way and share with their particular sense of genius. And Lynn Lyons has a lot of genius in her. So I am so excited to share that with you today. I am going to keep this short and sweet because I know you want to get straight to the good stuff. I am sending you so much love on this beautiful day. I hope you're being super gentle with yourself. I hope you are using as many skills as you can and reminding yourself that today's a new day. It doesn't matter if yesterday didn't go well. Just do the best you can today and show up as best as you can, but go gentle. All right, let's get over to the episode. I will talk to you guys next week. Well, welcome, Lynn Lyons. I am so thrilled to have you on the show today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Okay, so very exciting. You just wrote another book. I will say another book. It's The Anxiety Audit. Can you tell me before we get started, why did you choose that as the title?
Well, actually, what happened was so I have a podcast called Flusterclux, and I do that with my sister-in-law, Robin. She's married to my brother. And during the pandemic, one of the courses we created together, she called it The Anxiety Audit, because we wanted to go through the patterns that maybe people were experiencing, and they didn't have words to them. They didn't know what was going on. And so we did this course, and we put it out there. And then my publisher said, "Do you want to write a book?" And I said, "Okay." And Robin said, "Well, why don't you just make the course we did into a book? It'll be easy," because she's never written a book before. So that sort of was the genesis of it. So the publisher liked the title, The Anxiety Audit. The book ended up being much more expanded than the original course, but the title was from Robin and the course we did for the podcast.
Right. And I loved it because I think there is a degree of going through your book. We're going to talk today about the 7 sneaky ways anxiety takes hold and how to escape that. But I love how it feels like an audit, right? You're kind of auditing through these sneaky ways that anxiety can take hold. So I love that. I want us to go through today those 7 points, and then we will kind of go a little deeper if we have time. So can you tell me a little bit about this first main concept of how repetitive thinking disguises itself as the problem?
Yeah, well, it disguises itself as problem solving.
Uh-huh.
So when you are doing repetitive negative thinking, which is just the lingo we use to describe worrying and ruminating, and the way we distinguish between worrying and ruminating generally is which direction in time they head. So if you are a worrier, we say you tend to worry about things that haven't happened yet. And if you're a ruminator, you're going back over things. Both of them can feel pretty obsessive. A ruminator will go back over things and ask those questions. And did I say the right thing? Did I do the right thing? Did I buy the right refrigerator? Did I make the right decision? Repetitive negative thinking, the problem with it is that the thinking feels like the solution. So if I just think about this more, if I just go over it, remember anxiety is really seeking that certainty. If I just go over it, if I just think about it, if I just talk about it, if I just ask people about it, if I just get more information about it, that will lead me to a solution. But what we know is that the thinking is actually the problem.
Mhm.
Because when you overthink, you're caught in that repetitive cycle. You're seeking that certainty. You don't move forward. You don't take action. It just feels like you're doing something productive, but unfortunately, you're doing the opposite. One of the things that happens a lot when people go to therapy, if they have this kind of obsessive thinking and they get caught in it, is that the therapist will unknowingly say, well, let's think about this, or let's talk about this some more, or let's explore this, or what could that mean? And the anxiety is like, yay, I love this lady. Now we get to really do our thing. What we really want to say is the thinking is sort of what keeps you stuck, and we're really looking for action. We think about something as much as we need to figure out what the plan is, and then we want to take action. What we know about people that tend to overthink and get into this repetitive negative thinking is that they are less likely to actually act on a solution if they come across one in their thinking. So they're saying, "Oh, I'm thinking to figure this out," but then they never take the action necessary. Yeah. So it's a little bit it's a way to trick you into thinking that you're doing the right thing when you're really just feeding your rumination, feeding your worry.
I love it. And you mentioned in your book chewing the mental cud, which I
Mhm.
thought was just classic and hilarious. I grew up on a farm, so to me that was just very appropriate. I love it. Okay, so let's go to number 2. How catastrophic thinking makes the world a dangerous place and demands you react accordingly. Do you want to
Mhm.
share about that?
Sure. So catastrophic thinking, this is like the meat of the anxiety sandwich because you're always wondering or worrying about or vividly imagining the worst thing that could happen. And again, this feels like a solution. So if you are a parent and you have this catastrophic way of thinking, you're thinking, all right, so if I can imagine every bad thing that could happen to my child, then I can be ready for it. I can prepare for it. I can prevent it. But what we know is that the more catastrophic you are, and the more that you think about the bad things that could happen, the more fearful you are, doesn't mean that you're better prepared to manage things. It means that you start to avoid and remove things from your life.
Mm, mm.
So, yeah. So it just becomes, again, it becomes this way of the anxiety dictating what you do and don't do.
Right.
Mhm.
You had talked in this chapter around that I thought was so fascinating, isn't just around anxiety, but around the I think you called it the pain catastrophizing scale. And
Mhm.
that's something that I didn't know a lot about, which I found very fascinating. Do you want to
Mhm.
share your little thoughts on that?
Sure. So, what we know from pain, and pain is such an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, it's such a rich place of research and study. If you catastrophize about your pain, so if you anticipate that your pain is going to be terrible, you will actually respond as if the pain is worse than it is.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really, I work a lot with kids and a lot with families and parents. One of the things that's really fascinating is that, say you've got a child who's in pain, and you ask the parent to rate the child's pain. Say the child rates their pain as a 4, the parent rates the child's pain as an 8.
Huh.
The parent's rating of the pain is a predictor of impairment in the child, completely independent of, maybe the child says, "Oh, my pain is a 2." And the parent says, "Oh, I'm so worried about my child. I think their pain is an 8." That parent's catastrophizing about the pain predicts whether or not that child goes to school, whether or not they predict in activities, how much their life is impaired by the pain, even though the child is saying, well, my mom thinks the pain is a lot worse than it is. It's the parents catastrophizing that
Mm.
actually has the impact. Yeah.
That is so interesting. And so what really showed up for me was, is that also true of like the pain of the suffering of anxiety, right? Like,
Mhm.
is if we are catastrophizing how painful the anxiety will be,
Mhm.
is that still the same concept scientifically?
Well, I don't know about the research in terms of the way they lay it out so clearly with pain, but here's what we do know. Catastrophic parents, being a catastrophic parent about anything is a high risk factor for developing anxiety as a child for children. So if you have a catastrophic parent, it increases your risk of creating an anxious child. We also know that parents who are anxious have a 6 to 7 times greater risk of having an anxious child. We've got some
Right.
genetics in there, but there's an awful lot of modeling. So when we look at how parents talk about the world, one of the things that when parents talk about the world as a dangerous place, when they talk about their child as being incapable of functioning, when they step in so that their child doesn't have the opportunity to get to the other side, doesn't have the opportunity to independently problem solve, all of those things increase anxiety. And because we know that anxiety untreated is one of the top predictors of depression by the time you hit adolescence and young adulthood, we know that cycle is just going to continue.
Mm. Mm.
So when I am working with families and I am trying to interrupt this cycle, one of the things, just as you said, one of the things I want to really target is is this parent catastrophizing about their child's ability to function? And it may be catastrophizing about their mood, catastrophizing about them being upset or being nervous, right? So my child is so anxious about this. There's no way I can send them off on this field trip, or there's no way I can send them off to this summer camp because look, they're so anxious. It absolutely is contagious for sure.
And that's true of ourselves too. So if we're catastrophizing, we're
Mhm.
less likely to go on the field trip ourselves. Is that
That's right.
correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so say you're going to get on an airplane and you're thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to go on this airplane, and you start catastrophizing and imagining bad things happening on the plane or the plane crashing, and you activate your whole system. So you're having these symptoms, and your stomach feels weird and your heart is pounding. You say to yourself, oh my gosh, if I feel this bad just thinking about getting on the airplane, it's going to be horrible when I actually get on the airplane. I better not do it.
Yeah.
Right? So we're just watching this scary movie. And it makes sense if you're sitting there watching a terrible movie with a horrible outcome, of course you want to avoid that thing.
Right.
But we have to recognize that that catastrophic thinking is a pattern of thinking, not an actual predictor of outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talked about that around sleep as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing that people who have difficulty sleeping, people with insomnia, the number one thing they worry about is sleeping, right? So so you can't sleep, and then you start worrying about not being able to sleep, and off the cycle goes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Or for me, actually, I remember when I had my newborn baby,
Mhm.
it was the fear of being tired. So
Mm.
I would pressure myself to sleep because I'd catastrophized what tiredness was gonna feel
Yes.
like, right?
Yes. Yes. Certainly many people have that. I interestingly had this client long ago who catastrophized the feeling of being hungry,
Right.
that she couldn't tolerate feeling hungry. So you can grab onto anything and catastrophize about
Yeah.
it for sure. Mhm.
Fantastic. I agree. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is cool. And we've talked a little bit about this in the show before, but let's just go over it really quick. How big conclusions and all or nothing approach make the world smaller and harder to navigate. You
Mhm.
talk about going global. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So global thinking. So if you have a global attributional style or a global cognitive style, it means that you come to big conclusions, usually about yourself or other people, right? So, oh, I never get what I want, or I always screw up, or nobody understands me. These are these big, huge words that then, if you believe that, well, nobody likes me, well, then you're not going to step out there and take any kind of risks or reach out to people because you've already come to the conclusion. So when people are global in their thinking, they're much more likely to, one, break things down into parts so they can recognize, well, there's a sequence to making friends, or there's a sequence to getting a new job, or there's a sequence to cleaning out my basement. So they get into this place of like, well, it's a disaster. I can't do it. And then they also begin to believe that about other people. So when you're global about other people, it shuts you off, right? Well, that group of people could never like me, or that group of people is this, or that group of people is that. So the opposite of global, and we know that global thinking, huge risk factor for anxiety and depression. When we're confronted with that, or when we notice that we're doing that, we want to back up from it and say, okay, so I just heard myself using that global language. Right. I just heard myself say, oh, I'll never get this done. Oh, there it was. Right. Now, why am I saying that? Well, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. It does look like a big project in front of me. Maybe it is a big project in front of me. So now I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to recognize there's a beginning and a middle and an end. There's a sequence. Right. And that moves us out of that big global way of thinking that's just absolutely paralyzing. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. How anxiety's fear of judgment isolates and disconnects us from people, right? And I will, if you could, speak to where you also touched on the disconnection happens on the inside. Do you want to share a little about that?
Yeah. So interestingly, when people are lonely, it can be in two categories. One is that it's situational. So you've just moved to a new city, you don't know anybody, you're starting college and you're there by yourself. Or it can be more of a pattern of the way you interact with the world. And again, the conclusions that you come to. So you look at the way that the world is connecting and interacting, and you conclude that one is that everybody does it better than you, right? That it's easy for everybody, that it comes naturally to everybody, and that it's not going to work for you. And you go inside, and I always say, you have a meeting with your anxiety inside. You have a meeting, and during the meeting, you say, well, this is terrible. I don't have the skills. Nobody wants to connect with me. And also, you fear the judgment of other people. So one of the mistakes that we often make with somebody who's feeling this way, who's feeling isolated, who doesn't feel like they can connect, is we try and talk them out of it by saying things like, well, people don't judge, or, nobody's paying attention to you, or, oh, people aren't thinking that, right? That's just not true. People do judge. They judge all the time, and we notice people. And if I'm on an airplane and somebody has this really crazy hairdo, I'm going to be like, wow, look at that hairdo. Or if I, got an airplane and somebody has this really funky tattoo on their face, I'm going to say like, well, I wonder how they decided to put that tattoo on their face. We do it all the time. And so what we have to develop is the ability to tolerate being vulnerable. And we can do it in small steps. You don't have to, you don't want to share your life story with the person you met 2 minutes ago. But recognizing that when our anxiety shows up and says, I can't take a risk, I can't be vulnerable, everybody can connect but me, you go inside and you convince yourself, not based on what's happening on the outside, but what's happening on the inside, that you aren't capable of connecting. And then, boy, it just snowballs.
Right. I love it. And so true of the pandemic and where we're at in the world, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. The next two chapters were my favorite.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I wanted to talk about this a little bit. You talked about how being busy and overscheduled, which, like, I raise my hand to, adds and masquerades anxiety and stress.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about busy, and I raise my hand too, so I get it. We love the idea of being busy. Because it's this currency now, right? We can't really brag about how much money we make. We can't say to, if you ran into a friend on the street, and they said, oh, how are you doing, Kimberly? You wouldn't say like, oh, I'm doing great. I am making so much money this year. It's fabulous. Because they'd say, oh my gosh, that's so tasteless. Why is she saying that? But you can say, oh, I am so busy. My life is so crazy. That's become sort of our currency of importance of how busy we are. So the more busy we are, the more we feel like we're worthy. And the more busy we are, the more we don't have time to feel things that we're going to feel. So we keep ourselves busy as a way to just keep that brain of ours in motion, and we have difficulty sort of settling back in. But it is interesting, when I was doing the research for this chapter, a few things were really kind of amusing to me and true. You read these things, say, of course, is that a life of leisure that used to be something to brag about, right?
Yeah.
Back in the old days, because the farmers and the laborers and the coal miners, right? But if you could sit back and relax and drink a mint julep, right? That meant you had social status. Well, it's sort of flipped now.
Yeah.
We don't really admire people that sit back and don't work. So that's an interesting thing I found. And then the other interesting thing I found is that people who brag a lot, and sometimes it's that humble brag, right? Oh, I wish I weren't so busy. Oh my gosh. Yeah. People who brag a lot about how much they work are very inaccurate about the hours that they work. And the more hours that you say you work, oftentimes, the more you're off. So people say, oh, I work 100-hour week. And I always think to myself, no, you don't, right? Because even if you worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's not even 100 hours a week.
Right.
And so what they found is those people who say, oh, I work 70 hours a week, really are working about 40. But it's just indicative of how much we want to keep ourselves busy.
Yeah.
And how oftentimes it sounds kind of backwards and paradoxical, but it's true that we really like that feeling of chaos that we create, because it means that we don't have to sit back and sort of look at how things are really going.
Right.
And we do it with our kids for sure. And a lot of kids right now believe that the way that life is supposed to be and the way that we measure our success is how busy we are.
Yeah. I always think of I remember moments where early in my own anxiety recovery, where I could feel, and I've talked about this on the podcast, feel myself typing really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, when you're so focused on what you're doing, you do tend to have less anxiety. So it feels like a relief. Almost, it's a compulsion, right?
It's
a
is.
relief to your anxiety. I don't have to be up here if I'm typing like crazy, or I'm
That's right.
focusing. And I think that you use the word masquerades, our anxiety and stress. I think that is right on the money, right? That where we are busying as an avoidant compulsion.
That's
Do you
right.
agree with that?
Yeah. Well, because if you've got a lot going on in your head, and maybe your thoughts are saying, you're not good enough, you're not busy enough, you should be doing this, right? You're shooting on yourself, you're doing all this stuff. And if you can keep your brain and your body busy and occupied, and almost as if you can't keep up, and you've got this little feeling of urgency or emergency. Oh, I've got to do this. It really distracts and sort of satisfies those thoughts in your head of, what's going to happen next. And it allows you to not really experience the worry and the anxiety, because you're just busy.
Right.
Well, yeah. One of the things that's interesting, we did a podcast episode on this a little while ago, this term high functioning anxiety.
Yeah.
Which is sort of amusing to me, right? Because it's a thing, right? Everybody wants to have these new categories, right? It's not this, it's this. High functioning anxiety. And they had this list of the list of symptoms, this checklist I saw in this article, which was just silly. You chew your lip, or you chew gum, or you don't make eye contact, it's just silly. But when we look at it, high functioning anxiety is no different than any other kind of anxiety.
Yeah.
It's just that you're getting the job done, and then people are giving you a lot of positive feedback for that.
Right.
Right. So
yeah. The busyness is another form of avoidance of the fear.
That's right. That's right. And and because of the way our culture works, it feels good in the moment, and you get the payoff of somebody saying, oh my gosh, You are so busy. How do you do all that you do?
Mm.
Oh gosh, I've never met anybody. You know what? If we want a job done, we got to give it to Kimberly. She's going to get it done. And
Right.
all of that feels so good, but
Right.
it totally burns you out if you keep it up, for sure.
Right. They're
Mhm.
like, "No, I'm just over here doing a bunch of avoidant compulsion.
Yeah,
That's all
yeah,
I'm
right,
doing."
right. We don't
Right.
say that, right? Like, oh my gosh, you're doing so much, Kimberly. Oh no, I'm just avoiding compulsing. Yeah, no, we don't say that. Yeah, yeah. They'd be like, oh, okay, so maybe we won't give her that next assignment then. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that brings me to the next part of this, which again, these were my two favorite parts and
Hmm.
concepts. Mainly, I think, because I still am like, ooh, there's some truth there. I need to be
Yeah,
listening.
yeah.
And I think it links so well together with the last one about being overscheduled and busy is talking about irritability, right?
Hmm.
Because you had said here, and I'll use your terms exactly, how irritability likes to blame others, but can
Hmm.
be a red flag for you. Do you wanna share that? Because I feel like they go hand in hand with
Yes.
that overscheduling. Do you tell me your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. And in fact, like all of these patterns sort of overlap, don't they? Because we can
Yeah.
be catastrophic and overscheduled at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah, irritability is a red flag. So, irritability, I talk about all these patterns, and irritability is a sign that perhaps you're really not addressing what you need to address. One of the definitions of irritability that I talk about in the book is that it's described as blocked goal attainment, right? So
Mhm.
that's a research term, is
Yeah.
that you can't get what you want and something is in the way. The other term that I read, and it's in the book, is they defined irritability as feeling angry and the ability to sustain that anger. So it's
Mm.
this constant sense of not getting what you want, not being able to feel satisfied. And what happens is you start looking outside to find out why you're so irritable. It must be because my kids aren't doing what I told them to do. It must be because my partner is not fulfilling the agreement that we made. It must be because my boss is such a jerk. It must be because of the traffic. It must be because of the weather. It must be because of this. And what we really want to step back and look at is, how is this constant level of irritability? How are you sustaining it? What are you doing? Is it your perfectionism? Is it the fact that you want to compulse and people are getting in the way of your compulsing? Because you're in your mind, if I can only compulse, then I'll feel better, but people aren't letting you do what you want to do. Is it because inside there is a constant conversation with you about how you're not meeting your own expectations? How are you creating this level of sort of low grade simmering, this low grade dissatisfaction that is just eating away both at you and your relationships? It's hard to hang out with somebody who's irritable all the time.
And what would you suggest somebody do if they've caught this red flag of
Mhm.
irritability? How would you encourage them to navigate that?
So the first thing you want to do, and I think I say this about a lot of the patterns in the book, is you just want to talk about it openly with the people you live with. Because one of the things that's enormously helpful is for you to own your own stuff, right? So if you know that you're struggling with irritability, or even just on a busy day, you come home and you're feeling particularly irritable, to say to the people that you love, the people who are in your orbit, hey, you know what? I had a rough day. I'm feeling irritable. It is not you, it's me. It's not your fault. So you're
Mm.
really going to pay attention to that blaming. And you can even say to the people around you, give me a few moments, right? I've got to go for a walk, or I'm going to listen to some music, or man, I just need to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And then give yourself permission, and more than permission, sort of give yourself a little kick in the hello that says, I'm going to work on releasing this irritability without going after other people.
Mm,
And that diffuses it very quickly. And then if you're a parent, you're modeling that for your kids, which is a wonderful thing.
yeah.
And then you really have to look and see if it's a chronic thing. What do you keep doing over and over and over again that's making you irritable? How are you going to recognize that and accept that? Because a lot of times people say, well, I don't know why I'm so irritable. And then we talk about it and it's pretty obvious why they're so irritable. Now that means you have to adjust or adapt, and it might be your schedule. Maybe you're not getting enough sleep. Maybe you're saying yes too often when you want to say no. Maybe you are ruminating in your head about how other people have let you down all the time. Maybe you're catastrophizing. So those horrible stories about what the world is going to look like are really making you irritable. So it's a way for you to step back and say, what am I doing that's resulting in this state that I'm in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll just, for being transparent, I have found as soon as I'm irritable, it's because I'm refusing to feel some feeling. Like that is, for me, I'm like, I don't want to feel this feeling. So I'm going to be like real sharp and all edgy around everything. So I think that's just such a great point. It's like, I don't want to feel the anxiety I'm feeling. So I'm just like
Yeah.
tight and reactionary. So I think that is such a common, I see it a lot with my patients as well. Just a deep sense of frustration of, like you said, they won't let me compulse. And that means, okay, that means that you're going to have to feel some anxiety, right? So I
Right.
think
Right.
you're on the money there. I
Yeah.
love it. Okay. This was an interesting one. And the last point, how self-care is hijacked and becomes not self-care at all.
Well, and I think that you sort of teed this up for me very well, because oftentimes what we call self-care is really means of avoidance, right? Trying to eliminate. So I'm trying to get rid of some feeling. I'm trying to avoid something that I need to address. I don't want to feel this way. I talk a lot about our elimination culture and how we're really focused on trying to get rid of things like feelings or discomfort, or right. So we take on these practices that we call self-care that are really about getting rid of something or avoiding something.
Right.
And so that can be anything from drinking or using other substances to spending money you don't have to binging on Netflix and not getting the sleep you need because you feel like you want to escape what's going on. When you are doing something that in the moment you're saying, you know what, this is really for me. And then the next day you feel regret about it, probably not self-care. Right. Self-care, if you do it consistently, after I do something that is truly, one of my good self-care things, I don't say to myself, oh, I can't believe I got 8 hours of sleep last night. Like, oh, what a loser. Or I can't believe I went for a walk with my friend. Oh, right. But if I spend too much money, or if I stay up too late, or if I skip my exercise that helps me so much, or if I eat half the chocolate cake, the next day I'm probably going to say, oh, why did I do that? I should have. So that's one of the easy ways to sort of determine for yourself whether or not you're engaged in self-care or self-medication. But self-care isn't a one hit wonder, right? It's not a quick fix. It's a consistent pattern.
Right. Right. Yeah, I wrote a book about self-compassion, and I talk about the same thing. Is people will say, well, this is the self-compassionate thing to do, to not face my fear, or to not get out of bed. And yes, I understand some days we have to be gentle, but I think we also rely on self-compassion sometimes as a way to avoid our feelings.
That's
and
right.
avoid fear as well. And I think that really, is so true. You did talk about self-medicating. And then you had said that when you're able to identify these 7 points, that's a form of self-care.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Do you want to share a little about that and what that looks like?
Well, so if you are reading this book, or if you're listening to me now and you're beginning to recognize that you have a few of these patterns that really take over, and you begin to own them, just like I was talking about with irritability, and you begin to see the pattern, it takes courage to change the pattern. It takes courage to say, oh gosh, I'm a catastrophizer. Or boy, do I get caught up in ruminating about things as a way to solve problems. Or, you know what? I have been saying that my 2 or 3 glasses of wine every night is self-care. and I'm really noticing that I feel worse the next day or I don't sleep very well. So once you begin to own them, and once you begin to, you can talk about them openly with the people you care about, things start to shift. The biggest thing, and I'm sure you see this with your patients as well, Kimberly, the biggest roadblock that I run up against is when people deny that they're doing the things that I know are causing them distress. And then when they blame other people. I say this all the time. I had this client, the daughter was struggling with OCD, dad had OCD, he was highly perfectionistic. Things had to be perfect in the house. He would miss his kids' recitals or their soccer games because he had to come home after work and make sure that everything in the house was perfect. And I was trying to explain this to him, this rigidity in his OCD. And he said to me, "What's wrong with a neat and tidy house?" Now, nothing, except that that's not what was going on here. But his denial of his patterns and his inability to own them and to talk to his family about them, because you can imagine what his daughter did when he said that, right? She like threw herself back on the couch and rolled her eyes, got in the way of him being able to move forward. So when people talk about, say you're phobic of something, and we talk about the courage to face your fears, right? So if you're afraid of bridges, you have to have the courage to go across the bridge, or if you're afraid of germs, you have to have the courage to touch germs. I feel like the courage is much more the courage on the inside to acknowledge what's going on and then to work to do the opposite and to really be honest and vulnerable with yourself. The courage comes not on the bridge or with the germs, but the courage comes from saying, I'm really struggling with this pattern, with this issue, with this compulsion, and it feels scary. I'm going to face what's going on inside of me, and that's going to help me face what's going on outside of me.
I love that. There's an accountability that's just so
Mhm.
hard, but
Yeah.
is sort of like the first step, isn't
Mhm,
it? It's such a
mhm.
well, awareness is the first step, but
Yeah.
that accountability,
Mhm.
that's a hard one. Like,
It is a hard one.
it's a good one, but a hard one, and I
Yeah.
think do you have like, I know we're close to being finished, I wanna be respectful of your time, but do you have any thoughts on how to work towards that accountability, particularly if you're someone who's rigid and doesn't like that?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think is really helpful is for people to recognize that these patterns and OCD and anxiety is really common, and people don't talk about it. But gosh, how many people have OCD in this world? How many people struggle with the things that we talk about on a daily basis? So I say to people, you're not unique. Your problem isn't special. It feels big to you because it's your problem. But there are really a lot of things that we can do to help this. We know a lot about it. It's not mysterious. The content of what you're worried about or the content of your OCD is meaningless. This is a process. This is a thought process issue. And let's just get over this idea that it's so special and that you're unique and that there's nothing anybody can do because you're worse than everybody else, right? So that's one of the things I do. And then also really helping people learn about other people's stories. I think there are some wonderful books and resources where you read about other people's struggles and you begin to realize, gosh, this is so much of what I've experienced. It's a matter of being vulnerable and a matter of moving away from this idea that the perfect world that other people are presenting is not so perfect after all. Yeah.
Yeah, so true, so true. Lynn, I have loved getting all your wisdom. Thank you so much. Do you wanna tell us where people can learn about you and about your book and all the things?
Sure, sure. So my website is just lynnlyons.com. I'm on Instagram at Lynn Lyons Anxiety. I'm fairly new to Instagram. My younger son is my Instagram helper. And then I'm on Facebook if you go on Lynn Lyons and just put in anxiety or psychotherapist. We've got the podcast, Fluster Clocks with an X, that comes out every Friday. By the time this comes out, by the time that people are hearing this, the Audible book for the Anxiety Audit hopefully will be released because they told me it will be out in January. I just recorded it right before our Thanksgiving in November. So I'm excited to welcome that into the world. So yeah, there's all sorts of videos and things on my website and resources and things you can check out.
Fantastic. And I will link all those in the show notes. Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for coming on. It's a delight to meet with you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all of your wonderful questions. You made it so easy, which is nice.
Please note that this podcast or any other resources from cbtschool.com should not replace professional mental health care. If you feel you would benefit, please reach out to a provider in your area. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for supporting cbtschool.com.